Thank you both. So just to kind of give you a preview of what we're going to be looking at today, we're going to go over a brief summary of this piece of legislation for the Youth and Families Protection Act. Alex is going to talk a little bit about some of the kind of data and evidence around why this legislation could be important. Evan is going to talk us through how to write effective testimony, and then Alex and Evan are both going to kind of share some examples of testimony they've written for this piece of legislation. Then we're going to kick it over to me, and I am going to do some work in navigating us through the Maryland General Assembly website to kind of provide a hands-on tutorial in how to upload legislation once you've drafted it. So very broadly, I think the really important piece of this legislation is that it kind of helps fill gaps in Maryland's code as it relates to non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ folks. And so it really is going to broadly protect youth and families in accessing critical and essential services. So some of the pieces of the code that this legislation is targeting include human services. So our Department of Human Services, for example, provides a sort of wide swath of services for the state, foster care being one of the primary ones, but outside of foster care, any kind of housing, cash, or food assistance programs, programs for older adults, human trafficking victims, etc. There's a lot that goes into our human services work, and so really looking to just broadly protect the full range of human services in our state. Something that's kind of exciting about this piece is that it would actually really establish Maryland as a national leader in ensuring that throughout the entirety of its code, LGBTQ Marylanders are protected from discrimination. And this would really kind of ensure also that, despite sort of these administrative regulations that can vary from administration to administration, depending on who might be in the governor's office, for example, who might be appointed to a specific position within one of these departments. This legislation would ensure that regardless of whoever's in the governor's mansion, that these protections exist, right? And it's not going to be up to the discretion of any given agency how they go about implementing policy. And then I think the last piece of it that's really important is kind of the mandate for appropriate training on LGBTQ plus identities in affirming ways. This really helps ensure that we empower those who are providing human services, that they have the tools to really support and affirm LGBTQ youth. And so, by sort of mandating this education, not only will we have policy in name, but the policy can then be sort of experienced or felt by all of Maryland residents. So Alex, you're going to talk through some of the data points for us.
Yes. This slide shows us by large. Okay. This slide shows us the discrimination, harassment, and violence LGBTQ youth experience with their immediate families and in foster care. 78% of LGBTQ youth who are not out to their families, and which is for many reasons, with one of them being their families are not supportive of LGBTQ folks or even are hostile towards them. And we also see the same percentage among LGBTQ youth who are left or foster placements due to hostility towards their gender identity and sexual orientation. One in 5 transgender people have experienced homelessness, many of whom are Black or people of color. Not only are LGBTQ overrepresented in child welfare and juvenile justice systems, but transgender and gender binary youth are overrepresented at higher rates than LGBT youth in child welfare and juvenile justice systems. So this bill will explicitly protect LGBTQ youth and families by expanding non-discrimination to gender identity and sexual orientation, and which will provide a clarity for professionals regarding policy, training, and comprehensive care for youth in child welfare systems. And this is also good for youth who are experiencing higher levels of psychological distress, and this will help affirming their gender identity, like using their correct gender pronouns.
Yes. So how do we actually write effective testimony, given now that we know how great the bill is? So the first thing is just naturally the introduction. This is pretty short. Normally you just introduce yourself, so that's your name, your pronouns, if there's an organization you're representing, and then if you have any like short story relevant backgrounds, that would help the legislators in their consideration of your testimony, feel free to add it right there. And then you state your stance on whether you support or oppose the bill. So of course, for this bill, we want you to support it. So just say, I support this bill. And then you give, and the most important part of the introduction is basically you give the main reason why you're supporting the bill. And so you're going to back this up later on in the body, but this is kind of your preview of saying, this is the main reason I'm writing this testimony. This is the main reason I have taken all the time and consideration to do this. It's because I firmly believe that this bill will do blank and will help in blank ways. And then, of course, there's an example. Just give your name, pronouns, that you support the bill, and then why. And then next is the body. So this is probably the most important part. This is basically where you tell the lawmakers exactly why the bill needs to pass, and you give a lot of reasoning and evidence why. And normally what is really important, especially why we want to get as many people to submit testimony as possible, is to make sure that we share as many personal stories as possible. So statistics are great, and we will definitely encourage you to use them. But what's really important is sharing your own personal story or the story of somebody you know, and using that in relation to why the bill needs to pass. What truly does make your testimony unique is your perspective. And then when you have all of these claims and when you have your own story, try and back that up with statistics, with evidence, with experts, just trying to say the same things and give kind of a greater reach of what the problem really is. And you can do and approach your body in many different ways and many different structures. You can identify the problem, then share how the bill will help. You can tell your story, then do the same thing, tell how the bill would help, or you can like inverse it. So you explain what the bill does and how it would help, and then how that would impact your own life. What doesn't really matter which structure you do, as long as you make sure that you're telling the story that you want to tell, that you're sharing what you want to say. And then once you're done with all that, try and do the conclusion. This is pretty easy. You just want to reiterate your stance and your support for the bill. Just take like the most important parts from your introduction and the most important parts of your body, and just reiterate them. Make sure to say, this is the most important thing that I have, and I want to touch on this so you remember it when you're considering my testimony. And then the last thing you want to do is just share any final thoughts if you have them, and then just thank your legislators for considering the bill. And then there's an example down there, just I support this bill. Thank you for supporting it, and I hope that you will support it. And then just give your name and, again, if your organization is applicable there. So that's how you write the testimony, and then here's some ways to make your testimony better. So the first thing, and I touched on this earlier, is that you want to tell your own personal story. So there truly will be, is like, if everybody just writes their own statistics and just does statistics and evidence and experts and nothing but that, there's going to be 50 million carbon copies of evidence and of testimonies. So what makes every testimony different and what makes every testimony unique are the personal stories that you bring to the table that you would use in combination with that evidence. That's why it's so important to make sure that you do have those. And then also you make sure they also have evidence. So think of your argument as like a persuasive essay, right? Whenever you have to write a persuasive essay for school or anything like that, you always want to strengthen that with evidence. So try and have evidence. It doesn't really matter in what form, whether it's an expert or empirical data, statistics, reasoning, what have you, just try and make sure you have some. Another tip is just make sure that you outline and structure your testimony. So again, thinking of testimony as a persuasive essay, it's always better, and you always have a more cohesive narrative if you plan out what you're going to say and when you're going to say it in advance before you write it. That just make sure that you have a nice cohesive structure that the lawmakers really just understand very clearly. And the last thing you want to do is make sure that your claims and what you are saying are very specific to the bill and to the impacts. So instead of just saying that something helps or harms LGBTQ+ people, explain how it does. So instead of just saying this harms LGBTQ+ people, say it harms them through discriminating, through blah, 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 what have you. And then with all of that in mind, I believe we have an example for an effective testimony. I believe this is actually my own. So the first thing you see, and I color coded very prettily for you, is that you have an opening. So I just state my name, my pronouns, where I'm at. I'm a sophomore at Reservoir. And then I say I support this bill. And then I go on to my actual story. Don't personally have any experiences with the foster care, but I do have experiences as an LGBTQ+ high schooler in Maryland. So I drew on that, and then I back that up with evidence. You can see there, I give a lot of statistics from renowned and prestigious organizations. And then after I do all of that and I explain what the problem is, I give you my evidence, I give you my solution. So I'm saying, this is the bill, and I mean, this is the situation, and it's really terrible. And then this is exactly how this bill will actually help. and I give you evidence and statistics there. And then last thing, after I do all of that, I just do a conclusion. So saying that this is the reason why I urge a favorable report. And then I, again, thank my legislators and write my name. And that's just a good example of like a cohesive narrative and testimony.
For my example, I wrote my testimony from an ally standpoint, and I specifically focused on LGBTQ youth, like for the statistics I use and the talking points that I talked about previously. But you can choose whatever you would like to focus on in your own personal written testimony, like sharing your story.
All right, thank you both so much. And I am going to kind of just then walk us through kind of the next steps once you've actually drafted and written your policy. So in the move towards a completely virtual session, or mostly completely virtual session this year, and what will likely be part of how testimony is submitted in the future, there's a few kind of critical steps to follow. The first thing that you're going to want to make sure you do is that you save your testimony as a PDF document, not as a Word document, and make sure you're titling it with the name of the bill, your position. So this would be favorable, so FAV, and then either your name or the organization that you're a part of. The next step we're going to want to do is create a MyMGA account. And I'm going to click us through the website to kind of show where you can find the MyMGA from the Maryland legislative website. After you create your account, you'll want to re-navigate, kind of log back into the system and go to the witness sign up. You'll locate the House bill. The Senate bill deadline for submitting testimony has already passed, but we'll want to locate the House bill's testimony. You'll upload your written testimony as a PDF, and I'll show you where you can do that. You'll select favorable as your position, and then you'll go back up and make sure you click save at the top of the menu. And from there, you can kind of make sure that you'll kind of like see a confirmation. You won't see a confirmation, but if it's saved correctly, you should be able to see that you've submitted testimony, and I'll show how to do that. So I'm actually going to quickly navigate to the website. So this is just going to be mgaleg.maryland.gov. So this is kind of the main website for the Maryland General Assembly. When you're on this page, you'll want to go to the top right-hand corner where it says My MGA. And when you click that, I'm actually logged in. So let me try to log out. There we go, sign out. So if it's your first time navigating to the MyMGA portal, you'll come to this page, ask you to sign into MyMGA tracking. You'll actually want to go through and create a MyMGA tracking account. There's only 5 or 4 pieces of information they need for you to create an account. That'll be your name, your email, and a password. Once you click register, you typically get an email asking for you to confirm your account, typically right away. So you'll want to make sure you do that. So once you've filled out the tracking account and you've confirmed your email address, you can come back to the sign-in page. And then once you sign in is where you'll actually see your sort of tracking list of any bills you might be tracking. However, from this kind of main dashboard, you'll want to click over to where it says witness sign up on the left-hand side here. And this is the important part. I think one thing that we kind of circulated in emails for this piece of legislation is that there's a very short window for which you can sort of actually sign up and submit testimony. And that is 48 hours or 2 working days before the bill's hearing. So this bill, the House Bill 1088, the hearing is going to be on the 18th, which is next Thursday. So that means testimony is going to be due next Tuesday on the 16th. And you'll be able to submit your testimony that day between the hours of 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. So this is part of that challenging part of like needing to remember to go log back in on that Tuesday to submit your testimony for hearing that is 2 days away. So it's definitely been fun dealing with that interesting timeline and deadline this entire semester. But once you are here, unfortunately, I don't have an example to provide you because there's nothing that I'm able to sign up for because there are no hearings scheduled for later this week. And so I'm realizing the last time I did a review, typically there would be sort of a full list of bills that might be available for sign up. You'll want to, you can easily kind of search through either by, filtering by committee or just doing sort of a Control F finding for the House bill number. Once you are there, these boxes here will all sort of be available for you to fill out. So this first box is where you'll put either your organization or your name if you're an individual. This box here is called the position box, and this is where you can select favorable, unfavorable, or informational only. And then the testimony box is where you can submit your testimony as written, oral, or both. So for this case, I did submit for both. And then there'll be a button here for you to upload your testimony. So this is where you'll upload that PDF document. Once you hit the upload button, you'll hit OK. And then after that, you'll go back up here to the top left and hit the save button. And that is how you sort of confirm and make sure that you've submitted your testimony. And so you can kind of see here, this is actually testimony I just submitted for a hearing today. It is saved. And so this is actually kind of, you can see where, you can kind of see how I had named the file. And then you can also kind of see where, if it ever loads, what the actual file looks like, right? And so this is sort of an example of testimony I had submitted for this hearing. And so that is the very short and easy, painless, right? Not confusing at all way in which you can submit written testimony for bill hearings for the Maryland General Assembly. So I'm going to go back now real quick to our presentation because I feel like that, oh, okay. And so then the last piece, there are a few additional resources that we'll follow up on. So in addition to our info sheet, there's tons of resources out there that you can kind of look to provide different points of evidence and really advocating for this piece of legislation. So the True Colors and National Homeless Law Center, they just released a new state index on youth homelessness. What is not very stellar is that Maryland is 29th out of 50 states in their support for homeless youth. And part of the reasons why it's ranked so low is because we don't have a comprehensive non-discrimination policy in the administration of our youth homelessness services. And this bill actually would effectively ensure that we're doing that. The second is family equality. They have a whole host of resources around supporting LGBTQ families, including LGBTQ parents or individuals who are seeking to be foster parents or adoptive parents. Lambda Legal has a very good publication as well, Moving Beyond Bias. And this kind of talks more specifically about the importance of having equal access to justice within our courts system. So another piece of this legislation is actually non-discrimination policy for our courts and judiciary. And then the last piece that I have there is a new report from the Trevor Project that actually is looking more specifically about issues regarding mental health for LGBTQ youth. This was published just last year. And so for us, this was a very kind of timely study just that takes into account the pandemic and really the lack of human services and support for LGBTQ youth. And so with that, that's all I really have for us today to talk through. I am actually going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and we can talk through and answer any questions you might have.